Well, the first thing I'm going to do as we begin today's episode, which is episode 514 of the Simply Inspired podcast, and I'm going to introduce our very special and esteemed guest today, internationally renowned wildlife photographer and nature photographer Daniel J. Cox, who has been published extensively with the beautiful and incredible portraits of wildlife around the world for over 40 years. And he really uses that work to make a difference in the world, to raise awareness, to raise understanding, and to increase compassion, or to at least tap into the compassion most of us naturally have for the animal kingdom. And today we are going to be getting a glimpse, as much as we can do in an hour, of that 40 years plus of experience, National Geographic covers, international publications, in absolutely incredible work, as well as the remarkable work that Daniel does on the advisory board of Polar Bears International as well. Because even though he has photographed in many countries, today's focus will be primarily on the Arctic and the polar bears, but we will be discussing anything else that comes up as well. And really, all I can say is it's a massive honor to be here talking with Daniel for this episode and
Mhm.
raising even a little bit of awareness for the remarkable work that he does and all that it represents and all that he represents as a human being. I will say for our audience as well, most of you are used to this by now, but we are seaside again today. So fingers crossed the audio quality holds out well. And Daniel, I really, really appreciate you taking time out of your morning to be here today, speaking with myself, speaking with our audience, and raising awareness for what you do. Appreciate that very, very much. Thank you.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here. Yeah, I'm wasn't necessarily familiar with your show, but I'm excited to be here, and it's great to see uh, people that are able to communicate with the world in such a unique and interesting and productive way, and happy to be part of that. So yeah, thanks for working with me on this.
Very welcome. Very, very welcome. I appreciate you. And yeah, I mean, today we will go with the flow. I'm very outside of the box, Daniel. I don't even know what the box looks like. So you'll be used to that by the time we
Sure.
finish. But nonetheless, it is a wonderful to be here. Now, I would like to begin by discussing something that I believe is very important, but it's also quite an expansive question, and I apologize for that. I mentioned when we were emailing each other, when we were communicating to set this up, about yourself personally and people like you restoring my faith in humanity. And we were talking about that before we started recording just now a moment ago. And with that in mind, that is really a big part of what your work does. Is, in other words, you are out there raising awareness for the animal kingdom, raising awareness for these beautiful causes, and showing people that beauty. But how do you personally measure the impact of your work on a global scale? In other words, when you receive feedback from your photographs, you also, of course, organize tours, and I should have mentioned that in the intro actually, but you also physically take people to some of these remote and beautiful locations. When you see people changing their perception, or when you see the awareness of the beauty of the natural world awakening within them. How do you feel when you see those responses, and how do you measure those responses? I'm sorry it's a big topic to kick things off, but I think that would be a nice place to start if that's okay with you. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
that yes, no, not a problem. It is interesting. It's hard to quantify uh, exactly how powerful these types of photographs and videos and getting at people is. It's tough to quantify it, I have to admit. And there are times where I see the changes that are going on, for example, here in the United States with our politics regarding the environment and climate change and global warming and rules and regulations that help us have a cleaner environment to live in. When we see those things disintegrating, it really makes you wonder if what we're doing, and when I say we're doing, I'm talking about the community of photographers and journalists and people who are helping to bring this story of the changes we're all seeing to the masses, if we're doing any good. And there's so many times that I get discouraged, and it's one of the benefits, excuse me, one of the benefits of working with people like we do in our photography tours that we do now, my wife and I, Tanya, where we take people to some of these beautiful places that I used to go to just take pictures. Today we go to these places to take pictures. I'm fortunate to still be able to still take pictures because our tours are tied around photography. But we get to show people these amazing places and the animals that live there. And that's one of the things that is so inspiring is that I've never met it's inspiring and it's actually a little sad at the same time because what I find is that um, people when they get close to wildlife, I've never seen anybody walk away and say, "Oh, that was boring. That was boring. It was uninteresting." They always walk away with, "Oh my God, those things are so beautiful." Whatever it is, polar bears or orangutans or chimpanzees or whatever it might be. They love the experience of being so close to wildlife um, and getting a chance to see it firsthand. The discouraging part is that some of them go back, and I'm not saying people on specifically on our trips, but in general, people sometimes get this in close encounter, and they are so inspired by it, and then they walk away and they forget that when they get home the new mall parking lot that's going to be put up because of a great big new mall has an effect on those maybe not those particular animals that they may have seen in Africa or in the Arctic, but the animals around them in their own living environment are going to be affected by our continual desire to build and have more things and that's discouraging because but my hope is that you create enough those people that then do go back to their home uh, situations and take that excitement and try to share it with their communities in trying to understand and maybe uh, reduce the amount of things that they want, they feel like are necessary to have. Like, is a new golf course necessary? We had a situation here in Montana 15, 20 years ago, uh, close to where I lived, where they wanted to put in, it was a little small little ski resort. They wanted to turn it into a destination resort. And the community actually stood up and said, no, we don't want this. They planned for a new 18-hole golf course. We've got five of them in this little town I live in. And it's like, who needs another golf course? And so people, because of their love for this valley that this was all planned for, stood up and thankfully had enough voices to seriously reduce what they eventually did. And no golf course went in, no shopping center went in. They built a few more houses, but in general, the community stood up and said, "We don't want this," and that was so encouraging because it was, a place where great gray owls live. There's well-known habitat for elk and deer and moose and all those sorts of things, and they didn't want to see that destroyed. So there are some you know, little examples of, and that's a little example on the scale of, let's say, talking about planet Earth. But those little things can help long term, and it's those that you're hopefully you encourage people to stand up and work with and make changes with.
That is a beautiful message. Absolutely beautiful way to begin. understand. And I hope you realize through the work you do, you play such a significant role in changing and shaping those kinds of attitudes. And you say that, you say, well, it's a small thing in your local community, but that's what it takes to do the whole grassroots thing, to build up on the levels like that, you know? It takes those small changes in each community to spread around the world, and, we see positive change. But I have to ask as well. I mean, you've been doing this 40 years, you or more possibly. I mean, I'm going on your LinkedIn account there. But when it comes to doing this type of work for that long, you've mentioned about your president, Donald Trump. You've mentioned about some of these things, but you obviously keep the faith in what you've achieved, and you don't give up. You continue to see the faith, like you were just saying there, that people want change. There's a lot more people who care about wildlife and about the environment, I believe, than not. Now, I'm not an optimist, but I'm not a cynic either. Hopefully, I'm somewhere in the middle here. But in other words, you keep the faith even when you see somebody like Trump come in, and I don't agree with a single environmental policy that he has, and I don't really mind if that's on record anyway. But how do you keep the faith with situations like that, that your work is making an impact and you are creating positive change? Because you said to me, hope you don't mind me mentioning before we started recording, you're not sure if you're winning. And I look at it and I think, well, around the world, even things like the climate change marches and Greta Thunberg's marches and whatever we think of them or her or not, the amount of people that partook shows me how many people out there actually care. But I'm curious with you being much more on the front lines, if you like, than somebody like myself, how you keep the positivity, the optimism, the enthusiasm after all this time, when I'm sure you see negative things or you see blows to the work as well. If that makes sense where I'm sort of
Yeah.
going with this
No.
topic, I think that's very valuable to share to encourage other people. Thank you.
Well, that's a good question, and believe me, I have my days where I'm less than positive about where this is all going. But then what happens is I don't know what the connection is for me and animals, but I find myself, for example, I'm living here in this little town that I live in, and I have Yellowstone National Park 80 miles to the south, so I could easily go to Yellowstone and spend some time with the animals and in nature. But there's a little tiny park not far from where I live, about 2 miles, and I've become I've become more interested in staying active recently, riding my bike, etc. And so in the morning, I get up and ride down to the park, and I take my camera, and it's a small camera, but the main goal is to get some exercise. But when I get there, there's this beautiful little pond where there's muskrats, there's ducks, there's dragonflies, there's all these little things that are not great big megafauna, which is what I can go see in Yellowstone, like the bighorn sheep and the elk and the grizzly bears and the black bears, and bison. These are little guys that are right within the middle of this small city. And there's nothing more enjoyable than to sit down on the edge of that pond and wait for that muskrat who I know I can tell where his den is. And actually, there's a family of them, and the one that I really saw well 2 mornings ago I could tell was a young one because he was smaller, and he came out of the den. They go down under the water and they go back into the den site, which is in the bank of the pond. And he comes out and he stops and he sees me sitting there, and he stops, and you can tell he's just trying to take it all in, like, what's this guy up to? And I'm probably only, a meter, maybe a meter and a half from him. And he just sits there in the water with his head above the water, and we're looking at each other for, I don't know, it's almost 5 minutes. And I don't move, even though I wanted to take a picture. And it's that connection of that little animal that I've been able to break the bond, or break the barrier, I should say, of him being totally fearful of me being there. where he scurries off and dives underneath and goes into the bank, into his den in the bank, or he goes underwater. It's that connection of him looking at me and me looking at him and me realizing that he's such a interesting, beautiful little creature. Um, and why would we do anything to harm him or harm the environment he's living in? He's got every right to live in that pond as we do, in the side of the town that I live in. So, um, yeah, it's so that helps bring me back to being hopeful, is the connection, those small connections with wildlife. And, while I'm sitting there, one of the most beautiful insects there is called a blue darner, which is a very large dragonfly. Flies over and sits there and hovers in front of me for, I don't know, he comes back and forth for the next 5 to 10 minutes. Um, I shot some pictures of him, and I'd never gotten any close-up images of a blue darner. And when I looked at him on the computer, and you can see all the details in his eyes and his wings and his legs, and that stuff just like intrigues me, and it brings me back to feeling hopeful, that and most importantly, that I can't quit. I can't give up. These guys deserve representation. They can't talk. They can't go to speak to the Montana, politicians, or the Washington politicians. They can't do that. They have no ability. So if you don't take that up for them, they have nobody representing them. And so you got to keep trying. That's the way I look at it.
Absolutely. Well, you are a voice for the voiceless in that sense, in many ways, and that's a beautiful thing. Absolutely beautiful thing. And I
Yeah.
must admit, it's so heartwarming hearing these accounts firsthand. It's just absolutely beautiful, and I appreciate you sharing that. And that a particular story, by the way, does illustrate something that I'm curious to understand a little bit better, because this will obviously vary somewhat from one environment to another. I understand that. But in terms of animals getting familiar with you, I know that it's something you have to be very careful of, because
Yeah,
in many
that's
ways
right.
we don't want them to be too familiar with people and get too close to us. But at the same time, I'm curious if there's other similar examples to what you were sharing there with other animals in other places where they've kind of gotten to know you, or you formed a relationship or a degree of familiarity in some way, shape, or form in other situations, and how that aspect of your work sort of develops. Because I understand that keeping your distance, there's an ethical aspect, but I'm curious if certain other animals see you, and there's that familiarity, that connection between the two of you if you photographed them before over time. I'd like to sort of delve a little bit deeper into that topic, if that's
Yeah.
okay, and so people
Yeah.
can understand the process a little bit
Yeah,
more.
and that's a good point, and I'm glad you brought it up. So the example that I just gave you about the blue darner and the little muskrat are animals that uh, they're not dangerous to humans. And so it is important to understand and appreciate that there are certain animals that it's not good to be that close to. And bears are one of them, for example. And I do a lot of work with bears. And so it's really important to understand and be familiar with the subjects that you're working with. We see all the time in Yellowstone National Park, there's tourists that come through that spend or seem to dedicate a lot of time in their vacation to getting way too close to animals. But these are animals, elk and bison and bears are that, you need to give them the distance and the respect that they deserve, because they're powerful animals that can do real damage in a short amount of time. So it's very important to understand the animals that you're working with and be familiar with nature and the subjects that you may be interested in photographing or just observing at close range. And as I said, a muskrat and a blue darner are two animals, and one being an insect, obviously, that uh, you don't have to be fearful of damaging their situation or yours, and that's important. Anytime a human is affected negatively by an animal, the animal always ends up losing. So I'm very it's very important to keep your distance from the big animals in particular. But that being said, um, a big part of my work has always involved spending lots of time with different animals. In particular, when I first started out in photography, I specialized and spent many years documenting the lives of white-tailed deer. And I've always had an interest in spending more time than is actually beneficial from a business perspective. And when you get into wildlife photography, you don't think of it as a business, but you do realize eventually that if you're trying to make a living at this, you have to treat it as a business. And that's what I did for many years. Um, and my idea in the early days was, people have pictures of white-tailed deer, but they don't have pictures of white-tailed deer giving birth. They don't have pictures of white-tailed deer, um, you know, uh, uh, fighting and going through difficult diseases and all these things that take place over, let's say, a 5-year period that you may spend. If I would spend a long time photographing these animals, and that was the first thing that I did was spent many years photographing white-tailed deer, and then eventually did a book and so forth. Um, but most photographers get bored and move on to other subjects. And I actually look back on my career and think to myself sometimes that I probably, from a financial standpoint, wasn't as productive because I enjoyed spending way too much time with any particular subject because I wanted to get to know them. I wanted to see the things that you just didn't capture on a daily basis. It had to be over a long period of time to see some of these unique things that play out. And um, uh, so that has always been important to me. And so because of that, you do get to you do get to be part of the environment that they're living in. And so ideally, you make yourself as inconspicuous as possible. And it's like the fly on the wall thing. You're hopeful that they don't even recognize you anymore. They don't see you anymore. They don't react to you in any way, and they just go on with their daily lives. And that's important to get the true natural history of what's going on with the subjects that you're working with. Um, um, and so, uh, but in doing that, you also keep in mind that um, you have to keep your distance for certain animals, and that's why powerful telephotos, camera traps, that sort of thing are helpful for photographers that want to make sure they're respecting the animals they're working with and keeping themselves safe, which then in turn keeps the animals safe. So, yeah, that's kind of the way we do it. And I appreciate you pointing that out because it is important to uh, explain to people that it's wildlife photography is a lot of fun and it has great potential to help convince people how important these animals are, but we also have to respect them and do it at a distance that is safe for the animals and ourselves.
Absolutely. It's an important topic that I just wanted to mention, sort of ethically speaking, because people misunderstand that. And I was thinking of it partly from a human's point of view. I must admit, I was thinking of that more from the animal's point of view, that I wouldn't always want them to get too familiar with us because then they get familiar with people, they come across the wrong person, doesn't end well. But it is a two-way street, and it's a very important message to share that people um, treat them respectfully. I was thinking about it actually because here there's a lot of interest in, because I'm by the ocean, there's a lot of interest in the sea turtles that
Mm,
live
mm,
here along the coast of Cyprus, and you can go on boat rides and see them and everything. But I was very inspired and I found it very heartwarming, actually, the rules and regulations they have in place to keep a distance. And even though you can swim near, you can't get too close, and they have people observing that. And there's a whole set of infrastructure for that. And it just got me thinking about what you do. Now, with this talk today, there's another couple of things, and I would like to go to the Arctic subjects very shortly. But before we do, you mentioned something else there, Dan, that I think is very inspiring and relevant to people, is that you've made a living for many years doing what you love, and you've made a living, um, as I've already mentioned, showing people the beauty of the natural world, and also as a creative person. And there's a lot of people out there who have a creative talent, or there's a lot of people out there who have the kind of sensitivity and gentleness and awareness that you have, for example, towards animals, towards the natural world. Um, I freely admit to oftentimes myself feeling more affection and warm feeling to animals than I do to a lot of people. So there we are. But a lot of people don't know what to do with that. And a lot of people don't know what to do with, say, a creative talent. Some people view the type of gentleness that you have as a weakness when it's not really. It's very much a powerful strength if you use it the right way. So I
mm.
appreciate this is a multifaceted topic in the sense that there's a few different avenues it could go. But when it comes to your advice for somebody who wants to pursue a similar calling to what you spent your life doing, would you be able to share any words of wisdom? Because I would like to encourage people who have a creative talent, who have that natural affection, that natural connection with the natural world. I know those are slightly different things, but they're connected. And what words of advice you would give to aspiring photographers in this context, wildlife photographers, for how they can make a living out of this, or if it's not photography, your advice for someone who wants to work with the natural world in a maybe in a slightly different way, but they still want to use that connection for something positive. That's a long
Yeah,
question, I'm sorry, but your thoughts on that,
fine,
please.
yeah. No, it's a good question. I often ask myself, in today's world, if I was 16 again and in the same situation that, or in the current political environment and current uh, situation that our world is in right now, how would I be able to do this? And if so, how would I do it? As a still photographer, unfortunately, the answer is not real positive. But you know what, part of that, it revolves around the fact that communicating and the tools that we use to communicate today have changed. Still photography is important, but it's not as important as it used to be. And now it's all tied to moving pictures. And so I, I often get young photographers that come to me, or young people who are interested in getting into something similar to what I do, and they ask me, how do I become a photographer and get this, create a career like this? And I tell them, guys, it's not possible to be a still photographer anymore. You have to be able to be an well-rounded media communicator, meaning stills, video, sound, podcasts, anything that has to do with communicating with people. And just being a still photographer is an occupation of the past, to be honest with you. At least it is in the world of nature and wildlife. Now, you can still be a photographer if you want to photograph weddings and portraits and automobiles and that sort of thing, but in the world of natural history, it's gone. So how can you take that desire of bringing these stories to people and and make a living from it? Well, first of all, it's typically not very it's I should say it's very difficult to take something that lots of people love to do and make a living from it. And being in the outdoors and hanging out with animals is something there are a lot of people that would love to do. And so that uh, reduces your ability to find a successful way of marketing and making a living from that. But so my suggestion is working with nonprofits and organizations that have an interest in something that you have an interest in. For example, I'll give you an example here in Montana. I work with a nonprofit, not just Polar Bears International, which is here in Montana as well, but an organization called the Owl Research Institute, who I became involved with early on when I started having an interest in owls. And and they are a very small, tiny, tiny little nonprofit that needs pictures of the gentleman and some of his field helpers who are producing work in the field of capturing owls and banding owls and that sort of thing. So that became an important part of my desire to give back and help an organization become more successful through pictures and video. And now we're doing video for them. So and I should back up a little bit and say I get a little off track. Still photography is very difficult to see as a career path for making a living, but video and moving pictures is a different story. And there's still a lot of interest and markets for people who are doing quality video production and moving pictures as the way I like to refer to it. And if I was young again, and I'm not, unfortunately, as we all get there, um, I would definitely be looking at how do I hone my skills to become a better communicator with moving pictures. And that's an important element that if you're interested in doing this, that's the direction you have to go. And then the working with so on a smaller scale. So if that's something you want to do, you can hone your skills by looking locally. And I can't stress that enough. There's so many great little projects. It's like this small little nature park that I mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, and um, how many opportunities are in this little beautiful little nature reserve that give you the option to spend time with some of these animals and create a portfolio of moving pictures and maybe a small little production on this area that you use as a way to introduce yourself to nonprofits and organizations that could use this type of material. And then you have to realize you're not going to get rich. You're not going to get rich. Your payment is a big part of your payment is in the time you spend in the outdoors and the feeling of doing something that has benefited not just you but all of society in helping people appreciate these things. And um, yeah, the money involved with nature and wildlife is in the video world, there's the ability to make a living, but you won't, even if you're at the top of your game, you won't be making the kind of money that somebody in the financial world is making at the top of their game. So if you're the number one cinematographer in the world, you'll make a decent living, but you won't become wealthy. And if that's your goal, it's not this field isn't for you.
Well, some very, very, very good insights there. Very balanced perspective on the pros and cons, the ups and the downs. You say about money, though, I mean, obviously you've lived it, so you'll have your own perspective. But then I have to say, from the outside looking in, you've lived a very, very rich life in another way, in a whole different
Yeah.
way that, very few people will ever be lucky enough to do. Although at the same time, as you said, each person can find something locally and they can experience the profound love and purity and just the wonder that animals have. But also, yeah, the video side of things, absolutely. I mean, in this day and age now, I'm just going to chip in with one piece there. before we move to the next question, which is about the Arctic, is that I'm of the opinion that people need hope, and people need more than hope. They need heartwarming sounds too cliche, but they need the beauty and the wonder and the sense of awe and the sense of compassion and things like that that you represent through your work more than ever. As you mentioned, with the political landscape, but also with the landscape of the internet as a whole, it's that people use it for some very positive things, but some very negative things, and I think that encouraging people personally with the content creation side of things, using that term very broadly to capture the beauty of the natural world, whether it's on video, whether it's with drones and all these things we have now with cameras, with anything, people still need to see it. People need to see and feel that more than ever. So I'm of the opinion that it won't die out. It will evolve and adapt. But the principles of what your work represents won't change, even if the means to get there will probably and are changing quite a bit. But it's an opinion. You may or may not agree. But I would say to any content creators, it's a great insight you shared. Now we need to talk about the Arctic because that was one of the primary things with our interview today to discuss as a topic point.
Mhm.
Um, the Arctic world, polar bears in particular, the extreme cold landscapes and these things that you do, is a particular interest currently, and it's something that we've discussed. You sent me that beautiful video that I watched last night, my time, and obviously Polar Bears International, as I mentioned earlier briefly, with your involvement with that. Now, I'm getting the vibe here, as you've already mentioned, like with the deer and with different things that you focus on sort of different animals at different times. But the interest specifically in going to Arctic regions yourself personally, then following on with the tours and bringing other people there to share the experience, which is absolutely incredible, by the way. Where did that initial spark, if you like, to want to photograph Arctic related animals actually come from? I'm curious to hear a little bit rather about your inspiration with that regard, if that's okay, please, Dan. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, you bet. It's well, it really started as a young man. I've always lived. My family moved a couple times in our life, and I've always lived along the southern border of Canada. And so I've lived in northern states and started in Washington State, then moved to the northern part of Minnesota, and then eventually wanted to get back out west. So I'm now in Montana. Um, and it has something to do with the fact that I like colder weather. When we lived in Minnesota, we lived on a little farm north of the city of Duluth, and we had lots of black bears on the property that we lived on. And I remember the first time I saw a black bear that came across our backyard, the little area that my father would mow, and he came out of the trees and walked across our backyard, and I was just about fell over. I was so excited to see this bear. Now I was in the house and he was walking across the backyard, and it piqued my interest in bears. And so I started working with black bears a couple of years later, and eventually did a book on black bears. But that inspired me to start thinking about bears in general in North America, which includes black bears, grizzly bears, and the polar bear. When I started thinking about again projects in the big scope of things of all these three species, I started wanting to figure out, is there any place or is there a way to photograph polar bears? Because I knew that would be the most difficult to get access to since it was so far north. And that's what kind of piqued my interest was a black bear walking across the back of our yard in this little town called Twig, Minnesota, um, to getting me interested in bears in general and then wanting to find out more about how to someday see and hopefully photograph polar bears. And that led me to Churchill, Manitoba, which is the most accessible place in the world to see polar bears. And I was going there for 10 years, before I met a beautiful lady who then became my wife, who was running the lodge, and her father had started the polar bear viewing industry by building the first what they call tundra buggy, which is a great big machine that allows you to safely view polar bears from um, high above the ground, and or at least out of reach of polar bears, and give you an option to get out into the environment, which is the tundra, and see them, and take pictures of them of their daily lives. So that was the impetus for my my interest in finding out about polar bears. It was the black bear that walked across our yard on this little farm that we lived on.
It's amazing. That is absolutely incredible. That's what sparked the passion inside of you. So, with polar bears in particular, because this is obviously a big passion of yours, I know there's so many animals that you photograph, but with the Arctic being a very much a current passion and focus of yours, can we address maybe one or two? And I'm sure this will be too big of a topic to talk about today, but maybe one or two of the most common misconceptions about polar bears that people have if they've never seen one or if they don't know that much about them, because education is really how we break down the barriers here. And if there's someone listening to this and they're thinking, okay, maybe I've seen a picture of one, but I kind of don't know much about them and everything, then I would like to touch on that to sort of show the real side of them, not so much the myths and misconceptions. I'm aware that's probably a very big topic because you've been up close to them so much and you probably know so many things. But when people come on the tours and or even just when you speak to people about your work, are there certain things that people say, "Oh, this is about a polar bear," and you have to say, "Well, actually, it's not like that. It's like this kind of thing." I'd like to touch on that briefly, if that's okay, Dan. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of things. One is one of the things that people seem to latch on to, and I understand why, is because scary things are have a tendency to drive interest. And lots of people think that a polar bear, if you're on the ground in the area where polar bears live and one sees you from a mile off or whatever, that it's automatically going to just start charging towards you and attack. A lot of people think that and they are dangerous. There's no doubt, out of all three bears, the polar bear is the most carnivorous. They do eat a little bit of plant, but they they don't get any sort of long-term sustenance out of it. And so they're totally, virtually, almost 100% carnivores. So but humans are not on their radar typically as a potential food source. So just because you see a polar bear, if you were ever in the Arctic and you were on a tour or walking with somebody and a polar bear shows up, it doesn't mean you're in serious trouble. Now, that said, um, I I always bring bear spray or have a guide with firearm or that sort of thing when I am in bear country, and in particular polar bear country. But it is the misconception that the minute a polar bear sees you, you're automatically in trouble. That's not the case. The other thing is that the other thing that's kind of a misconception is that they look really cute and warm and fuzzy. And they are all of those things. But there's no way you would ever lay your hands on a polar bear, because that interaction would most likely inspire a reaction from a polar bear. So even though they look as warm and cuddly and cute as can be, in particular the cubs, if you ever tried to put your arms around a little cub, he would tear you up like a buzzsaw. I mean, they would, it would scare them. It would create a response that that is just a natural instinct to because they're not used to that sort of connection to anything. Even their mothers don't typically hold them and embrace them and that sort of thing. So even as cute as they look and cuddly as they look, you would never want to wrap your arms around one of these little guys. And you'd want, and let me tell you, when you're there in Churchill or other areas I've worked in Svalbard, and you see these cute little cubs, I mean, your instinct is these things are so cute. I mean, if you could get your hands on one, you'd think, oh, I'd just love to hug that little guy. No, you wouldn't want to do that. It'd be like turning on the a saw and starting it and then wrapping it in your arms. It would tear you up like you couldn't believe. They're so strong, so powerful. Even when they're just, months old, they're incredibly powerful little animals. So those are kind of two of the misconceptions. And that, most people in their right mind wouldn't even think about, doing something like that. But it is something I hear quite often when people go to these areas and they talk about how cute they are and wouldn't you just love to hug one of them? And I go, guys, you really wouldn't want to hug one of them. So it's that endearing uh look and the cuteness of these animals that help get people interested in all things polar bears and where they live, which is such an important topic. Is people don't understand that as cute as these animals and as beautiful as these animals are, without habitat, without a home range, they have no chance. And that's such a big part of working towards making sure that wildlife and nature is always got a chance on this planet. If we don't take into consideration their habitat, then they have no place to live and they will eventually be gone. So,
First of all, that's I'll talk about the habitat aspect shortly. But it's a very powerful message about the actual nature of the animals because it might be a strange analogy, maybe not with yourself, but I was thinking about this when I was preparing for this interview with bats, with the fact that I love bats, and a lot of people are afraid of them because of the Hollywood damage that's been done with the blood drinking and all of the false mythology that's
yeah,
for the most part been created
right.
there. And I was thinking, well, there's bound to be things like that with all sorts of other animals as well. So it's a very, very important topic to educate people on, understanding that the beauty and the purity and the all of these wonderful traits are there. I mean, frankly, I would say there's a lot we can learn from the animal kingdom with loyalty, sincerity, only taking what's needed. They don't have greed, they don't have all sorts of things that we have, but also not romanticizing that and taking the relevant precautions. So it's hopefully we're doing that justice with the balance. The last couple of things, we'll go slightly over the hour mark that I said, but only a little bit. With regards to the environment, specifically with the polar bears and the Arctic aspect now, I mean, it's very well known the climate change effect, the melting of the ice, the changing of the landscape, and all of these things in a way. And I would say that that's an upside of the internet world, is that people can become aware of things like that a great deal. But at the same time, it's different for you because you're actually there in the sense that you will be documenting something over a long period of time, and this showed very much in the video that you sent me. You're actually seeing the environmental changes, the changes in the ice, the changes in the structure, and all of these things firsthand. And I would like to get your thoughts on the most important aspects of that you would like to share. In other words, the things that you regard to be the most important that people need to hear about the global warming, climate change, in this kind of aspect, because a lot of people know about it, which is good, I think, but at the same time, there's probably not a very deep understanding. There's probably sort of a surface level understanding with the general public. Whereas, as I've already said, you're actually seeing that develop. So, can you share with us a little bit about how that actually works and what people in day-to-day life can do differently to change it. That's a very big topic. I'm aware of that, but
Yeah.
I still feel it needs to be shared. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's a good that's a good thing to bring up. I I think the most important thing. Okay, first of all, my I've been going to the Arctic since 1990 89 was my first trip to see polar bears. And and the changes that have happened since that time are just astonishing based on what I've personally seen. And an example of that is we used to go when I would go to Churchill, there used to be a trip that a company called my wife's family owned a company called Tundra Buggy Tours, and it was eventually bought by another company called Frontiers North, who now owns the Tundra Buggies, and and they used to do a trip back in the 90s and into the mid 2000s called Cape Churchill. And what it was is that each year, the last part of the season, polar bear viewing season, was the 2 weeks of basically November. It started when I first started going November 3rd, and we would be there till maybe November 17th. And it was that later time in the season that the snow started to form. I mean, the ice started to form on Hudson Bay. The snow was on the ground. It looked more polar bearish. And so as a photographer, that's why I would go there, is because it looked like polar bear habitat, because this area is the southernmost populate has the southernmost population of polar bears anywhere in the world. So they're at the edge of the cold extreme areas that polar bears typically live. And during that time, in particular, they come off the ice in the wintertime or off the ice in the summertime, and they're on land until this time in November, about mid part of November. So that's when I would go there to photograph them. And the way that it worked was that we would take the buggies from Churchill down the coast about 30 miles out to a place called Cape Churchill, which is one of the most unique places in the world. It's a spot where the polar bears congregate because the ice freezes there first, and they know that they've got to get out onto the ice to hunt seals. And so as they've been on land for the through the summer, let's say July through early November, they now are hoping to get back out on the ice. So that's where they go. And we would take the lodge and we would actually move the lodge down to Cape Churchill. And we used to be able to do that in the 90s and the early 2000s because it would freeze hard enough. You couldn't take the lodge along the coast because they're big machines that take this mobile lodge uh, without having good solid foundation. And that solid foundation came by way of the ice freezing. So in about, I don't know, maybe 2010, Frontiers North had to stop the Cape Churchill trip because they couldn't actually guarantee that the coast was going to be frozen enough to get down to Cape Churchill. So this really unique place that I grew up, in my polar bear years, photographing is no longer accessible, which, there's pros and cons of that. Maybe it's not such a bad idea for the bears, although it was a very small footprint and very well organized so that we stayed out of the areas that the polar bears um, were in as far as looking in to photograph them. So, so that was a big change that I would have never thought in my life early on in my career that I was going to see happen over my lifetime. And so those things, that particular situation is a big one that I relate to when I think about how different the Arctic is, the subarctic, and this Churchill is actually considered the subarctic. It's at the edge of the Arctic, and how different that is in today's world. So, the other things the other things that I find as a photographer that are really difficult is the changes in migration routes and migration timing in particular, where we used to be able to pick a subject and say, okay, I want to go, I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to see the sandhill cranes in Bostel Apache this winter. And you used to be able to put a absolute uh, marker on your calendar. They're going to be there December 1st and they'll be there through February 25th. And now that can be either earlier or later, and it's so difficult in many situations to get an absolute time frame that you can predict to be that you can predict is the time that you need to be there. And so these are kind of the sort of things that I see as a wildlife photographer that have changed so dramatically since the first days that I started working in the field and taking pictures of animals and nature. And so, yeah, that's uh, some big changes.
And for the length of time of our discussion today, which I like to keep these to about an hour because it's something that people can take in the information
Yeah,
and it's not overwhelming, and that also hopefully they can put some things into practice, which is very important to me. And that is the question I would like to sort of close out with is basically the future. And what I mean by that is, the things that people can do on a day-to-day basis, in your opinion, that make a difference to animal life wherever. Now, obviously, our actions have a global impact as we're talking about the global warming concept and everything, but also, as you mentioned earlier about the muskrat, about the dragonfly, and all of these lovely things, there's things that people can do in their local area. So, like, I sort of volunteer to clean the beaches here and things like that, and not alone, but with groups of people and everything.
right, right.
And it makes a difference. I think a small one, but as I said earlier, these small decisions that we make add up on a global scale if enough people are behind them.
Yeah.
And really, I would like to close out with that question: is there's people listening to this who care? And personally, I stand by the fact that I believe there's more people who care about animals than people who don't. There's obviously always going to be indifferent people. There's always going to be people who show abject cruelty and hunt and do all of these things. I mean, it's there, but there's also, I would say, more people in the general population, or at least an equal number, who care about doing something, even if it's very small, even if they're working 9 to 5 and they think I really can't do much, they can do little things. And as a message of hope, I would like to close out, Dan, by please getting your thoughts on little things that people can do on a day-to-day basis that make a positive difference to animal life in any part of the world where people are listening to this. Again,
Mm.
it's a big question, but you're in a unique position, having seen so much over so long to be able to share advice on that. What are your thoughts on that aspect, please?
Well, there's a couple things. Okay, let's go day to day that you can do and then long term. And day to day, it's so important, I think, to keep in mind that whatever you buy, whatever you purchase, that is is part of your daily life, um, things that you maybe don't need. It just becomes additional junk in your life that somewhere has to be manufactured and then shipped and all these things that go with these little tiny trappings. Now I'm not going to specifically talk about a person in my life that I've seen go through this process, but but I see people not taking into consideration that the little trinkety things in life that they think are important for whatever it might be, uh, make up a lot of contribute a lot to the carbon footprint that eventually affects wildlife, nature, and eventually humans. So it's these little tiny things that you may not need that you can stop yourself and think about what is really important. Is this really necessary? So and it's just little tiny things and Amazon has made that so easy to do. And so it's just something it's just a little thing to keep in mind. I know I think about it when I go, geez, boy, that little thing for my cameras sure would be helpful. Well, is it really helpful? Do I really need it, or can I go, nah, I really don't need it. Number one, I don't spend need to spend the money. Number two, it's just another thing that had to be manufactured somewhere. So if you just think about those little tiny things now and again while you're living your everyday life, it can make a difference if, especially if all of us did that. It would make a huge difference. And then the bigger, I think even bigger thing that's important is what we're seeing right now in the United States is politicians that we have elected that we obviously made a decision that the the guidance and regulations of certain things in our world in the United States that we deemed important at one time are no longer important. And we're seeing this right now. In the United States, they're discussing dismantling all of the environmental regulations that we have in the US. I mean, that's crazy. All the years that have been put into understanding chemicals and fuels and things that are detrimental to not only wildlife and nature, but humans. And we're making this decision that arbitrarily across the board we're going to get rid of all this stuff. I mean, it's crazy. And that relates to what we decided as citizens to vote for during the last election. And we, as I like to say, you get what you vote for. And if you don't like this sort of thing that's coming down the pike, then you have to rethink how you're voting the next election because those things are really important. And we've got politicians that say, "Hey, nobody wants this stuff. They voted for us. I don't like it. And I represent them. Therefore I'm going to get rid of it." Well, I think it's very short-sighted, and I'm hopeful that the vast majority of people will eventually say, "No, we didn't want this much of what you're suggesting. We need to keep some of this stuff." Without a doubt, there's waste and mismanagement and it is difficult keeping a tab on all this stuff that we feel like makes our lives more difficult to live in.
Mm.
But some of it is absolutely essential, and especially if we're thinking about not just, it all comes back to, thankfully, animals and nature have a tendency to suck people in. And they vote and they make changes based on the beauty and the interest they have in these beautiful animals. And thankfully, that's beneficial to humans as well, because I don't know if you're not thinking about your children and your grandchildren. Okay, if you love the polar bears more, I'm up for that. But um, it's about all of us. We're all on this thing. We're all in this thing together. So long term, it's the people that represent us that are making these decisions. We have to make a point to let them know that quality of life, quality of living is as important as making money. That's my feeling.
Oh yes, I agree very much. And well, I must say, in the States, you are a little bit up against it with some of those things. But as I said at the beginning, people do care. This is why I think that education is so important, Dan. And just to close out with this as a final point, yeah, I think that somebody like Donald Trump, and this is not a political opinion, this is just a human opinion now, doesn't have the understanding of what we're talking about because, you take someone who's been a millionaire from the time they were 8 years old, somebody
Yep.
who's grown up in New York,
Mhm.
lived a lot of their life in a penthouse suite, all the gold, Trump Tower and all of that stuff. They're not going to have the connection to nature because, in all fairness to him, he's probably never experienced it. Now, I'm not saying that to defend him because as I said at the beginning, I don't agree with a single environmental policy, not one. I was heartbroken with that aspect of the election. But at
Mhm.
the same time, that is why then, I mean, it's probably too late for him because he has his opinions. But this is why the grassroots education, when you take somebody out there, for example, and you show them the polar bears and they physically experience some of this stuff, when they see your photographs, when they hear, our talk today, other talks that you do, they become aware in a way that maybe they never would have done previously. And I believe that the value of that will always stand strong because that's why this type of education is the answer. If somebody had taken Donald Trump aside, for example, I read a thing a while ago with John Muir, and I think that's Yosemite, isn't it, that he was
Mhm. Mhm.
protecting?
Yeah,
And he took the president at that time out there. I read the book, about the summer in the Sierra and all of this a while back. And he took the president at that time on a trip, and they slept under the stars, and they did all of these things to get out there. And that was a big part of what encouraged the protection of that park, which still stands today. Now, I appreciate it might be a bit more difficult to take a president on a camping trip in the modern age, but educating all people, and some of those people then go on to make decisions. Maybe if they're educated the right way, they'll make the right decisions in the future. And this is why I wanted to do this because I don't believe in age, like that. But there is a generational thing. And if you look at it, I'm 27. I want to use this type of vehicle that I have to reach people, even if it's just a handful of people, so that they
yeah,
can understand these things a little bit better. So, it's I have to get my 2 cents worth in there at the end as well. But there's a lot of people who care. Keep the hope, and I appreciate today. We've gone about 15 minutes over the hour that I said, but
yeah,
either way, we've shared some great topics. I really appreciate you being such an open book and sharing not only the scientific and the practical aspects, but so much of your own experiences as well.
yeah.
Very
Appreciate
grateful
it.
for your time and just
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Okay, Liam. Well, I'm grateful for the chance to do this with you, and I'm also impressed that you're doing this great show that is making a difference. I honestly believe all of us working as hard as we can to try and bring these stories to the masses. I think eventually will help long term. And yeah, I think it's amazing what you young people are doing with these podcasts and ways of getting the media out there that we never had in the early days when I started out in photography. So yeah, thanks for your part in it as well.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I'm a small cog in the machine, but at the same time, if it's even a few more people become aware of this, then we've done our work. And like I say, I appreciate the kind words. I appreciate your time very much, and I wish you a great day ahead. You've got all of your day to go now. I'm coming to the sort of the end of mine, but thank you so much, and I'll continue to keep an eye on your work and anything else I can do to ever help in the future. Then please let me know,
I
and we'll go
appreciate
from
that,
there.
Liam. And you
Yeah.
keep up the good work with the turtles and cleaning the beach.
I will. I will. I mean, any small things I can do like that, I do them. I mean, that we've
Yeah,
had some wildfires here in Cyprus as well, and I just anything we can do to help.
yeah.
And you love nature, so before you go, that's a closer look at the seaside
It's
view there.
gorgeous. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Really pretty.
So that's a
Yeah,
little something for you. And I was swimming with the fish earlier today, and then talking to you. And who knows, I might have one more swim before the end of the day. But yeah, anything I'll do like that that's grassroots, I will continue to do and encourage other people to do the same.
yeah.
So
Thanks,
here we
Liam.
are. All right,
Okay, all
thank you.
right, buddy.
Take care.
And nice to meet you. Hope we can shake hands one of these days and see each other in person.
I hope so. That would be lovely. That would be wonderful.
Come to Montana and we'll do a show down in Yellowstone or Glacier National Park or something. Uh,
I
come
would
visit.
love to. I
Okay.
would love to. Thank you so much for the
Okay.
invitation, and thank you. Take
Thanks,
care.
Liam.
Have a
Okay,
lovely
you
day.
too. Okay, you too. Bye bye.
Bye now. Bye bye.
Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.